Real disclosure is when a Christian breaks down what this actually is. We're dealing with deception. What the world is calling disclosure, it is going to be the great lie that is going to lead people astray.
Hey guys, welcome back. Sean from SGT Report. Thank you so much for clicking play. This is part 2 of my interview with Justen Faull. His new movie is Higher Entities, The Lost Tapes. You can find that on Vimeo. The better way to find it is to go to fourthwatchfilms.com. Part 1 of this was certainly gripping, and the way we left off is that, well, the elite don't want you to know God is real, basically, Justen. At the end of the day, there are very powerful forces in the secret government, the shadow government, the military-industrial complex that are involved in programs in which they are communing with entities that some people might call aliens. You and I would call them non-human entities, interdimensional entities. Perhaps fallen angels might be the best way to describe them. Where do you think we should start here for part 2? I know you mentioned Stan Deyo and Ray Boucher, and a big part of your film all leads up to your conversation at the end of it with Ray Boucher, which I thought was gripping. I have a soundbite I want to play for folks in a few minutes, but where would you like to begin this part of our conversation?
Well, I just want to remind everybody that there was a document in the late 40s, federal document 6751, that the FBI classified, and they knew in the 40s that we were not dealing with space aliens, but that we were dealing with higher entities that were interdimensional, and they were using language right out of theosophy. Anyway, I wanted to drop that in there as we get started, because we have to remember that the government since the 40s has had very clear knowledge what we are actually dealing with here. The downside is that they began to communicate with these entities, and they began to have a relationship with these entities, very much like what we talked about with the Nazis in the Hollow Earth film, how the Nazis were tapping into these entities. We wanted to talk to Ray Boucher because everybody kept telling us, you have to talk to Ray. He was the head of MUFON for his state, very involved in the UFO community, even back in the days before the internet. He was very involved in the local, the male-only type of UFO community that took place back then. But he wasn't the kind of guy that was going to just come out and give us an interview. We really tried hard. I found him on Facebook, and he became my friend on Facebook. Yet he was not really giving me the access to his buffet of information, if you will. He was very friendly, but he was cordial, but he wasn't very open with me. He finally said he would think about it. It's like, yeah, I can probably work something out. Then he just goes silent. Can't reach Ray, And so, you got Derek Gilbert and Tom Horn both telling me that you have to talk to Ray Boucher. And just to add a little bit of spice to this, Dr. Michael Heiser, who wrote The Unseen Realm, he vetted Ray Boucher. Now, Michael Heiser, some people don't like him because, he's all about peer-reviewed research, and he really doesn't entertain certain thoughts that we might entertain. But I think that's a good thing in the case with Ray Boucher, because a guy who is so cut and dry, who is so strict and conservative in his beliefs, for him to vet Ray Boucher and to say that this guy is completely legitimate, this is real, this really happened, that actually gave me some comfort, knowing that we could trust Ray Boucher and his information.
Well, let me jump in and let me ask you something. Do you mind if I play a soundbite? This is a conversation between you and Ray Boucher, and I think it will help frame up the larger context of our conversation as it pertains to what we discussed in part 1 and what I was driving at with the problem of satanic ritual abuse and human sacrifice. And as that all ties in with this current problem of this alien agenda or this alien deception. Do you mind if I do a screen share and play this part of your film?
Be my guest.
Okay. In my notes while I was watching the film, I wrote, I think this conversation occurs at the 1 hour, 44 minute mark, if I'm correct. And I wrote, satanic rituals, human sacrifice, occult rituals are being used to gain access to and communicate with these entities. And then we have this soundbite from Ray Boucher.
Did they give you any insight at all to some of the methodologies of what was taking place?
They've used terms such as satanic rituals. They hinted at possible human sacrifice. Very much an occultic type ritual in order to gain access to and communicate with these entities. To me, almost the exact opposite of what you would expect someone involved in the hard sciences to take to try to obtain a result. But in order to obtain the results they sought, they had to take that sort of tack. So yeah, very much what originally started out as scientific experiments morphed into a we can do better. We can accrue better results, greater results if we delve into ritual in order to contact these entities.
All right, I'll stop the screen share there. I mean, that's just hair raising. And I think
No,
it ties
look,
in specifically to the point I was trying to make in part one, is that there's a whole bigger picture going on here when we talk about missing kids and child sex trafficking and satanic ritual abuse and human sacrifice.
Man, what's just incredible about what he said, there's a nugget in there that I think we really need to focus on. It's a we can do better attitude. We can do better. We can get more. We can squeeze every last ounce of juice out of this orange before we before we feel that we've achieved the greatest element of juice squeezing. It's like we're going to get every bit. We're going to get that drop of water out of a rock. Like that's literally the mindset. These guys were going to do anything and everything they could to do as good as they could, to get as much information as they could from these entities, all the way up to the point of human sacrifice in a federally funded government program.
Now, you know what I think is interesting about Ray is his connection with MUFON. So part of his awakening was looking at the UFO question, the question of alien visitation from, we all presumed, from different galaxies or planets within our galaxy, right? So he was part of that. Let's identify this. Let's figure out this UFO thing. It's very interesting. And part of his awakening and part of that exploration and his awakening took him full circle, right? To come to this conclusion, which is, I think, speaking to the alien deception and what this alien visitation really is.
Let's just real quickly so people understand. Ray Boucher he's not just a Johnny come lately. Ray Boucher has a long history, even from his childhood, of being fascinated with the alien scenarios and the supernatural. He's a theological mastermind, by the way. Anglican priest, Anglican exorcist, Baptist pastor. I mean, the guy has a lot of credentials in different denominations. He's a solid Bible believing Christian. The guy has dealt with demons and aliens and all of this for years. And so because of his credentials, because of his unique, let's just say his unique credentials, because it's not every day that you find people that are a Baptist pastor, Anglican exorcist, and head of MUFON for your state. I mean, the guy has his hand in a lot of things. And so two men who were agents for the Department of Defense, they reached out to him and they said, we really need to talk to you. Would you meet with us? Well, they met with him privately in a hotel, and he didn't know until last minute where and when, which was very fascinating because that's exactly how he treated us. We had to drive out to Nebraska with our crew, and we just had to camp out not knowing what time or even where we were going to meet with him. I mean, literally, we were going out there on a leap of faith. It had taken weeks to get him to finally give us a scenario of a possible date. I mean, I thought it was going to be like one of those interviews that just falls through. It's taken people over a year to get him on their podcast. Like, he is super hard to get in touch with. He just doesn't want to talk to people. And so he worked with us. He tells us his full story about these two men from the Department of Defense who, they basically brought him in as a consultant. They weren't paying him or anything, but they needed to consult with him because of his unique credentials and his unique standing in this alien UFO phenomena. So they meet with him. They start disclosing things to him that people could lose their lives over. But what's fascinating, Sean, is that they're telling him these things that are going on right now. Okay, this is not 1948, 1949. This is modern day America. This is the modern system that's going further and further. And, you look back and say, well, they breached, all these different things back in the day. Well, this is different because now they're going with that I can do better attitude. Well, we were using psychic chairs back in the late 40s and the 50s. We were forcing people to astral project in the 50s. But now we can do better. We can do more. We can get closer to the entities, and we can tap into something far greater than we were tapping into back in the 40s and the 50s because we're more advanced. We've gotten, we've come a long way since then. So that whole we can do better that whole we can do better attitude, that's actually very dangerous when you're dealing with the occult, because it's higher up in the echelon. It's the upper echelon of occult sciences and occult magic. So I want to make that very clear. This was not some old guy that was still living from the 40s or 50s. This was a different group doing the same type stuff that the Collins elite were doing. We don't have any evidence that Ray Boucher's group was the Collins elite. What we do have evidence is that the things that they were doing, that they admitted to Ray, they sounded like they were just a modern version of the Collins elite.
I guess, Justin, at the end of the day, the question here is, why on earth? Well, I guess the answer is power. People in the government want to commune with these entities to get power. So this we can do better attitude is to get the most power and the best possible technology and information from these entities, these quote unquote aliens. But therein lies the deception, because the very nature of these entities is to deceive. So where do you want to go from here as it pertains to Ray Boucher? And I know that you wanted to talk about Stan Deyo as well.
Yeah, so the Ray Boucher thing, it's very fascinating, because here's a guy who sat down and talked with these members of the Department of Defense, and they never claimed to be the Collins elite. Matter of fact, there's no name for the group because they don't exist. These are clandestine operations. And so Ray Boucher shared with us that some of the things that were taking place with this group in the modern unit, they were similar to what was going on back in the 40s and the 50s, except it was far more advanced. Again, we can do better. We can get more information, and we can maybe be more responsible with what we're going to do with it. But this all lines up with what Stan Deyo was talking about. Now, interesting backstory on Stan Deyo. Stan Deyo has been known by people to really say some pretty far out there stuff. Not that it's not true, but that it's just so far beyond what the average human being wants to believe. And so what I found fascinating with Stan Deyo is that Tom Horn told me while we were over at his house, he didn't say this on camera, but he said that, so you guys are going to work with Stan Deyo. And I'm like, yeah, he agreed to do an interview. And he said, man, he goes, Stan Deyo says some stuff sometimes. It's just so far out there. He was like, but let me tell you, he says, he's legit. I'm like, well, I believe he's legit. And Tom said, man, he goes, before my house burned down, Tom Horn had a house fire years ago and lost everything. He said, before my house burned down, he goes, I had this big front page newspaper article from the UK, and it's got Stan Deyo standing next to these other like world-renowned scientists. And sure enough, they're working on anti-gravity craft for the international governments that are in cahoots with each other. So Tom Horn validated Stan Deyo, said that he was on the front page of some major newspaper in the UK, and that they were advertising in the UK newspaper that they were in fact working on joint operations, top secret joint federal operations of various governments working on anti-gravity craft. Now, Stan Deyo gets taken down to Australia. This is fascinating because do you remember when we talked about the Hollow Earth, how we talked about Operation High Jump and how we were working with Britain and Australia? Admiral Byrd was with Britain and Australia. Remember that?
Absolutely.
These are the same two groups that Stan Deyo is working with. The same two groups that were working together with Admiral Byrd and Operation High Jump and the UFOs in Antarctica, they're now working together on anti-gravity craft and technology that allows man to be able to project through walls. So Stan Deyo gets taken down to Australia. He's working inside these deep underground military bases. And all of a sudden, after so many years, it just gets 86th. Like the drop of a dime, 86th. Everybody just go home, never talk about this again. I mean, they're out there working on some of the craziest technology inside these deep underground military bases. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, you know what? This never happened. You need to get out of here immediately. And the story is that there were problems between the humans and the government and some of the entities that they were working with. Now, these entities were manifesting as actual people. Like they were manifesting as actual physical, what would appear to be some type of a super flesh. Stan explains that there was a couple different categories of entities that they were working with. Now, Stan didn't work directly with the entities, but the people that were right above him, I guess that he was answering to, they were working directly with the entities and they had communication about these things. He said that they had a very strange quality of their skin. He said that like the skin, if you were to like kind of move the hand around in sunlight, that it would have like an oil slick, kind of like a reflection, like a rainbow patina oil slick finish. He said that he knew a lot about these entities because the people he was working with They told him. And these were not the kind of entities that you want to mess with. These were literally like super advanced in everything that they did, everything that they knew. Now, Stan Deyo said when he first got into the program, he said that he was aware that they had made a deal, that the United States government had made a deal with a group of entities. Now, he believed that it was the Greada Agreement that took place between Eisenhower. Now, some people, they've got different views on this, Sean. Some people believe that the Greada Treaty was between the gray aliens, and some people say that it was between another type of alien. But regardless, we do a really good breakdown of this on the road with Darren Geisinger, because it seems that they were using this Greada Treaty to kind of prime the pump for the coming deception, where there's going to be good entities and bad entities warring together. You know, the idea of like the Nordics versus the Greys. I got to say it like that because I never heard it broken down like this before. And man, it was so organic. We just had a camera running in the car, and it was just like, it just all came together. So fascinating that the Greada Treaty was, even in and of itself, it was part of the great deception that was going to be coming. It's that long game. They're playing that long game. They've got to create both sides of the narrative so that when things play out, it's like, wow, these things have been just charted perfectly over the years. But the thing I want to get to here.
Well, can I ask you something? Let me just ask you something real quickly. Just flush that out briefly about Eisenhower, because you touched on it. 1954, Eisenhower goes missing some evening, evidently, allegedly to go and sign this treaty that you just spoke of. And years later, members of his family say, yes, that actually happened, right? So this isn't just a fable necessarily. That actually may have happened.
Hey, let's just be real bold here for the sake of higher entities. Stan Deyo, who is completely credible, who has records, man, he showed us his documents. He showed us his sketches and his documents that he worked on. We actually have like his actual workbooks from while he was in the program. He told us that he knew while he was now granted the Greada Treaty would have happened before he was an adult. He knew when he joined the program about the Greada Treaty. He knew that something happened there, and he assumed that the big deal that they had made prior to him joining the program, he assumed it was the Greada Treaty. So this is coming out of the mouth of a guy who was top secret agent in the FBI. He knew about the Greada Treaty. He assumed that was the big agreement that was made. That everyone just assumed that was the agreement that was made. And this is inside the program. So I think that validates something happened. Now, the Greada Treaty, the official story is that Eisenhower had to go get some dental work done last minute. And it basically created what they would call a media blackout. This is a little window of time where a president is unaccounted for. Do you remember when there was a media blackout with Obama?
I sure do, and Clinton. And I think they both ended up in front of the Bilderbergs.
Exactly. Now, I use that as a little example because that's something that we all remember. That's from our lifetime, that we're in that lifetime range. It's like, yeah, we know that. There's people who remember the Eisenhower blackout just as fresh as we remember the Clinton and Obama blackout. And so those people were well aware that Eisenhower is nowhere to be found. And I forget the exact time frame of how long it was before they could find him and he was back on the radar. But people inside the government have spoken that he was at Holloman Air Force Base, that there was a UFO that came down, and that there was basically two groups of entities that were fighting for his loyalty, if you will. And so basically you had this lower group, this gray alien entity group, and they were fighting for his loyalty. And then you had the higher entities, which would have been like the Nordics. They were fair-skinned, very attractive to look at, almost like a perfect human, a little bit taller, nice bone structure, blonde hair, blue eyes, that old chestnut. And so you have these two groups, these two factions of supernatural entities, and they're both fighting for Eisenhower's loyalty, by extension, the loyalty of the federal government of the United States. And as Darren Geisinger breaks down, the Nordics are saying, hey, don't trust the Greys. Don't trust the Greys. They're going to screw you. And then you have the Greys saying, don't trust the Nordics. And so back then, they were already instilling a mindset that they were on different teams. Now, as Christians, we could say, hey, they're all on the team of Satan because they're entities that are against Jesus Christ. They're supernatural entities that go against the gospel. So they're obviously, they're not good entities. But they're going to be playing this long game that there's good entities and there's bad entities.
Right.
And they're going to go back and say, hey, look, we have records in our own government. Back in the day, it's going to be like an Independence Day scenario where the president is getting walked into some like underground base and they're like, look, we're going to give you a crash course because crap is hitting the fan right now and you need to know this. And I'm telling you that crash course is going to be, we went back to the 50s. This is what took place. We were warned about these entities by the Nordics. I mean, I can already see it playing out just like that. It was the long game that they started, back in the lifetimes of some of our grandparents.
Now, I think in your documentary, it might have been Ray Boucher who talked about the Nordics briefly, and you correct me if I'm wrong. I've got my notes here, and it's under his name. The Nordics, yes, peaceful. They portray themselves to be peaceful, but he pointed out that demons aren't always ugly and horrible, but they're always deceptive. So I think that's the point I want to make, as it would relate to the Nordics versus the Greys, which this is never, what's interesting, man? I've always been enthusiastic about the UFO question prior to waking up to this alien deception, but I never got into that question of the Greys versus the Nordics. To me, that's just part of the conversation that's very woo-woo. Is that, at the end of the day, is that the takeaway for you, that all of this stuff, is woo-woo as it sounds, is real and it's actually being pursued?
Man, Sean, if I could just like go back, like let's just say to my childhood, and I mean, I never would have thought in a million years that I would be sitting here at any point in my life talking about aliens. I mean, aliens were so taboo growing up. I mean, aliens were just, they were the subject of comic books and movies. I mean, it was always just portrayed by the media as something so far left field that it was never going to happen. It was so fake. It was a figment of our imagination. And no time growing up did I ever think there was a connection between aliens and demons or aliens and fallen angels. I mean, I never connected those dots. Now, I grew up where my dad was teaching me about demons at a young age. My dad being a Baptist pastor who was cast demons out of people. And by the way, we have a little short documentary on YouTube called A Baptist Exorcism. If you go to my YouTube channel, you can watch it for free. It's like 25 minutes, where my dad tells some stories about when he cast demons out in the Baptist church. But I grew up with that sense, but I never would have ever thought in a million years that there's going to be a connection between aliens and demons. It never occurred to me. So the fact that I'm having this conversation with you right now, the fact that I've made 3 films in the last 3 years, all 3 of them touching at some degree on aliens and entities, I would have never, ever thought that was ever going to happen. That here we are today, the government is bringing soft disclosure, and really you got to have at least 3 legs for a table to stand up, right? You got to at least have 3 supporting legs for a table to stand. And in my background as a personal trainer, there was 3 legs to the table in order to get in shape. You had to have your diet, you had to have your exercise, your weights, and you had to have your cardio. Just like that, the demons have to have at least 3 legs to stand on, and they've got more than 3 legs to stand on because it's the year 2019. They've got far more than 3 legs. They've got a table that is so strong and so supportive because they have completely deceived the governments of the world. They have literally come in, they have been giving technology to the governments of the world, secret knowledge, techniques. This was the other thing I wanted to mention. I think I mentioned to you before we started this interview. It's not just about technology, it's about techniques. They're bringing ancient supernatural techniques to mankind. And these are techniques on how to break through, how to open portals, how to communicate with certain entities.
Answer this for me. You just said that they have deceived the governments of the world, which to me I bumped on for a second when you said it, because my perception as we're having this entire conversation here, part 1 and part 2, is that the governments of the world, the people in the know, the people that are communing with these entities, they know they're demons. But maybe they don't all know that. Maybe some of these people are deceived and actually believe that these are aliens visiting us from other planets and galaxies that are providing this information and technology.
Hey, it's just like the news media. They've got a flavor for every demographic. If you're a liberal, you're going to watch CNN. If you're conservative, you're going to watch Fox, right? But in reality, they're all run by the same, by a small corporation of like 3 to 5 people. I forget what it was last time I checked. It's just like that. These demons, these fallen angels, they have got a flavor for every demographic, Sean. And that's what we have to understand, is that they're going to appear as whatever it takes to get every demographic checked off the list. So for governments of the world, well, they're the gods of old. For mystics, they're the gods of old. For the New Age crowd, well, they're they're the ascended masters, or they're the aliens. I mean, it goes right back to what Crowley said, that today they're angels and demons, tomorrow they're going to masquerade as something else. And you get into some of like the writings of Jacques Vallée, and you're going to find out that throughout history, they have manifested differently, even in their crafts, their spaceships. The spaceships that we see, it's like back in the day, they were like flying ships made out of wood, like blimps. I mean, you have all these ancient records of different looking crafts. It was always geared towards the demographic and the popular views of those days.
And the technology of the days.
The technology
So
of
in the 50s, we get flying saucers, and then we get silver discs. And so they can appear however they want to appear to appeal to those that are viewing them.
And Derek Gilbert breaks this down in our interview in Higher Entities. He talks about this a little bit. Tom Horn, gets into another aspect of the disc, but it's fascinating stuff. They will appear however they need to appear to appease whoever it is. It's like the ultimate shape-shifting conspiracy. They're going to say whatever is needed to get the job done. They're going to appear. And listen, if you go back to the ancient cultures of the world, it was very common that these spiritual entities had what's called a changeling quality. A changeling quality means that as soon as they enter into our reality, into our dimension, they can take on a certain form, a physical appearance. And so that's why you have people who've told stories of leprechauns and fairies. And I mean, look, it sounds crazy. This sounds preposterous to anybody with a brain. But we're learning things now that the ancient world always knew. And so these things can shapeshift. They can take on different forms. The Bible tells us that be careful how you treat strangers, because you might actually be entertaining an angel unaware. We know that these things have power. They can shapeshift. They can appear to be man. They can appear to be whatever it is. They can take on different shapes. And I like to also use this example of that movie. Man, I'm going to say something so crazy right now. There's a movie called Queen of the Damned. Some of you may remember this. It had Aaliyah, the famous hip hop singer, I guess, and then she died I believe in a plane wreck.
Oh, sure.
So Queen of the Damned, there's this guy. He rises to fame, and his name is Lestat. And Lestat is a vampire. He's eternal, basically. He's been alive for I don't know how long. He's been alive for hundreds of years, if not more than that. He's an ancient entity taking on the form of a human being. And he just goes up and he starts a band. And he becomes like overnight success. He's like going around, he's singing, he's got, and just to add insult to injury, all the music that gets played in the movie by the band, it's actually Korn, and we know Korn is a satanic band. There's no denying that Jonathan Davis of Korn puts so much satanic magic occultism into his lyrics. He's a God hater. Pray for the guy, not trying to criticize him. We need to pray for him. But here's the deal. I believe that these higher entities, these ancient entities of old, I believe that they can take on the appearance of man. And for all we know, some of the rock stars, some of the political leaders, some of the kings of old, I believe that it's very possible that these are fallen angels taking on different forms and different shapes just to get their worship and to draw people away from Christ into their deception. And I think that movie Queen of the Damned did a beautiful job of portraying this, that you've got a guy who is overnight success, the biggest rock star in the world. Everybody loves Lestat and they'll do anything for him. And they don't have any clue that he is an ancient entity just appearing as a human being, as a man. And I think that is so real.
That's super interesting. And for those who didn't get through all of part one, there was an absolute bombshell dropped at the end of part one of my interview with Justen that you got to go back and watch the last 10 minutes of that interview. It's very powerful. And when we talk about these elite, what you just said is possibly true, but what I've come to believe is that most of them that are involved in these types of occultic practices or satanic rituals or satanic practices, they are embodied by, they are personified by, they are possessed by the spirit of the Antichrist. So even if they're still human beings that were born precious little babies, or maybe not in the case of the person you mentioned at the end of part one, but they have given themselves over to this power. And so they're non-human in the sense that they are possessed by the spirit of Antichrist. Guys, earlier in part two here, Justen mentioned Admiral Byrd in our previous conversation that I posted back on April 1st of 2019. Part two of that conversation was called Spiritual Warfare, UFOs in Antarctica. Justen's work in this area with Earth Chronicled, etc., is extremely important work because it speaks to the entire deception, the alien agenda, the alien deception, the spiritual deception that is taking place, spiritual warfare that we are bathed in here on the planet Earth. And it actually speaks, I think, to the nature of the Earth. He gets into inner Earth, all of that stuff. What are they trying to do in Antarctica? What are they preventing us from knowing? There's just so much to talk about. As we round out this conversation here in the final 8 minutes, Justin, what would you have people know about the very nature of our world and what we're up against?
Well, we're not spinning around on a little blue marble in the middle of a giant cosmos. This idea of a whole bunch of planets with livable races of people. Like, I don't buy into that. Fact is, we are living on I feel like the Earth is much bigger than people make it out to be. I feel like, we are here. That God made this as our inhabitants. He made this as our habitation. This is our ecosystem. This is our terrarium, if you will. I grew up with pets and, creating a little terrarium for snakes and lizards and frogs. And, it's like we are inside of this fish tank, if you will.
A closed system.
It's a closed system. And I believe that the planets, I believe that, whatever planets do exist or bodies, whatever you want to call them, out in space, I believe that outer space is inside the firmament. I believe that what we would call space, like just the outer darkness, whatever you want to call that, I believe that is all inside of our firmament. I believe that the sun and the moon is inside of our firmament, the stars inside of our firmament.
I got to stop you, because for those who have not done the research here, and for those who have only drank the NASA Kool-Aid, I want those people to know, those people who say what you just said makes you a science denier. I want those people to understand that NASA themselves and space.com continue to move the goalposts. I've got this article from space.com recently saying that the moon, new research shows that the moon is within our atmosphere. They continue to move the goalposts, Justin, because as I have recounted with guests like David Weiss and Marty Leeds and my friend Crow 777, their heliocentric model of a 24,901 mile circumference Earth no longer stands up to the scrutiny that modern day optics provide us, which is to say their math, not your math, not my math, their math of what this is that we live on does not stand up to scrutiny. That doesn't make you a flat earther, doesn't make me a flat earther.
No, I'm not.
I've coined the term that I'm a globe as we're told skeptic. What you're saying is not the lunatic fringe. Read the book of Genesis before you attack Justin for being a science denier.
And let me I want to go on record. Like, I'm not part of a flat earth group. Like, I don't run around proclaiming this model or that model or whatever. I know what the Bible says. And if you could get through the firmament, let me just be very clear. This is what the Bible says. It's word for word. If you could penetrate the firmament, which you can't, I don't believe, but if you could, you would be in water, like under the ocean, because there is water above and water below. So, getting past the firmament, you might as well be in a submarine that can penetrate the firmament, because you're going to be completely in water if the Bible's telling the truth. And I believe the Bible. I don't subscribe to some of the flat earth ideas. I don't subscribe to some of the globe earth ideas. I personally don't care what shape the earth is. What I care is that, am I focusing on what the Bible teaches? And so, no, I'm not a flat earther. I'm not a glober. I'm nothing like that. Like, I don't subscribe to a certain group, just like I'm not a Calvinist and I'm not an Arminian. But I believe that we are living inside of a system that God created just for us. We are a pretty big deal. Our souls are important to God. Now, granted, we are nothing compared to God, but God wants our souls. He wants us to be part of his kingdom. He created us for his glory, to be part of what he has a perfect order. He's created all this. Sin has entered into that world. We're now affected by the sin. And, I think that this whole idea of everything that we can see, like, it's inside of the firmament. I don't believe that we can get past the firmament. And so all of this stuff, when we talk about outer space, I believe in outer space. I just believe it's inside the firmament. So there you go. People who are 100% flat earth, they're probably not going to like me, because I have no problem. I don't have a problem calling it outer space, because it's like the darkness up there. And I think that all that got kind of changed when sin entered into the world. That's a whole nother talk, where the holy mountain of God was, where heaven and earth met in the middle, and you had this little crossover space. Anyway, I could go, and that's a whole nother show.
Well, the problem with even going there in this conversation is that the 100% Globers aren't going to like you either. And what I want people to understand is that, and this ties the whole interview back together with the idea of Jack Parsons and Aleister Crowley and L. Ron Hubbard. And, well, what did Werner von Braun leave on his tombstone? Right? Psalm 19:1, talking about the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. This is much, much bigger, folks, than just drinking the Kool-Aid from NASA, which, again, continues to move the goalposts.
And
constantly.
hey, look, NASA is not like, I'm not going to sit here and say NASA's all evil. There, I think I may have said this last time. I said this on InfoWars and I got some blowback. There are people who work for NASA who are good people who they don't realize how high up the conspiracy goes.
Oh, sure. There's good people that probably work at the Federal Reserve in the city that the central bank they don't all know that that was founded by international criminal bankers in 1913. They collect a paycheck. No, your point's a good one. And there's not everybody in government is evil, obviously, right?
And
So,
look, NASA does more than just space stuff. Like NASA has whole research departments on tech, just tech, high tech stuff, things that came out of NASA. Because look, NASA wasn't even supposed to be sending out people in ships. Like there's so many years passed when NASA was like decommissioned. I forget what they called it, but when Obama was in office, like NASA was not quote unquote supposedly shooting people up into whatever it is you believe is out there. But Trump comes in, starts talking about Space Force. And I'm telling you, man, like we need to keep an eye on this stuff because Space Force might be the road that leads us to disclosure on a massive scale. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just going to lay it out there. People can take it. They can take it, deny it, whatever. But Trump is making a big deal about Space Force. And I think that Space Force is possibly going to be used to kind of move us into a form of some type of disclosure. Regardless of what people believe, there's going to be a story that's going to be told. But summing all of this up, the higher entity stuff.
and by the way, when you say disclosure, we're really talking about deception because any disclosure, alien disclosure, that would be the NASA official version of aliens in that story, that's deception.
It is.
Based on what we've talked about in this interview, that's 100% entirely a deception.
You want real disclosure? Real disclosure is what you're getting right here. Real disclosure is when a Christian breaks down what this actually is. That's true disclosure. You made a great point, Sean. Absolutely. We're dealing with deception. What the world is calling disclosure, it is going to be the great lie that is going to lead people astray. And it's already leading people astray. But that's why we wanted to set out on this project. You see, this project is so much more than just aliens and demons. This project is some of the history of getting into the government working with entities. And Stan Deyo said something fascinating. He believes that while he was at a United Nations meeting, he believes that he brushed shoulders with a female and a male entity. Stan Deyo says that he was at a United Nations meeting and that he brushed shoulders with this man and woman, and he felt they were in a little room together, and he knew that they were not from around here, meaning Earth. He says he felt like he was a canary in a cage. This is a guy who's a strong man of God. He's not a wimp by any means. This guy has seen things and done things and experienced things. But when he was at the United Nations meeting, he said that he felt like a canary in a cage and that he believed that some of the people that were there were part of this other race of people, this higher race of entities taking on this crazy human form. This came right out of his mouth. And look, we've got other stories we could talk about some other time about these entities at the Vatican showing up to meetings of the World Bank, and the IMF. But anyway, Stan Deyo breaks down some really awesome stuff. Ray Boucher, both men have insider information because Ray was communicated with by the Department of Defense. Stan Deyo was a secret agent for the FBI working in Australia in these deep underground military installments. Bottom line is this: we've got to be prepared. We need to know what's going on here. You guys are going to get so much more detail when you go to fourthwatchfilms.com. If you want to help support what we do, you can check the film out. You can stream it or you can watch it on DVD. Both are available on fourthwatchfilms.com. And listen, we don't know how much time we have left on this earth, whether Jesus returns, whether the Antichrist comes, or whether we die. We got to make sure that we stay vigilant as Christians. We got to stay vigilant, focus on the things that matter, try not to divide over small issues. We've got to come together in unity, but making sure that we stay true to theology and doctrine of the scriptures.
Yeah, well said. I just think it's interesting as I listen to people like Mark Maron and other people that are, I guess he says himself, atheist, that they make fun of Christians and they think that you're weak-minded if you're a Christian. And friends, that's the farthest thing from the truth. In a world filled with universal deceit, I think it's probably the most courageous thing you can do, because all of this stuff, everything we discuss on SGT Report, all of my guests, at the end of the day, we all come back to the same conclusion. This world is bathed in spiritual warfare. And I guess as Stan Deyo put it in your documentary here, Justen, the name Jesus Christ, when you invoke it, it stops all of it. Jesus Christ, the name Jesus Christ has incredible power, so much so that these people do not want you to even mention the name Jesus when you're in these DUMBs, these deep underground bases. Our guest has been Justen Faull. The movie is Higher Entities, The Lost Tapes. You can find it directly at fourthwatchfilms.com. And you spell that out, right? Fourth, spell out the word fourth, watch films.
That's right. FOURTHWATCHFILMS.com. We are running a promo with a double feature on the DVDs where you can get Hollow Earth and Higher Entities if you want to, some people celebrate Christmas. It's coming up. You want to be able to give somebody a gift that'll keep on giving, which is knowledge. Lastly, I just want to say that we did talk to Nick Pope from the secret space program in the UK, and Nick Pope did validate the fact that there's very much some potential that the Collins Elite was an actual group and it's not a conspiracy theory. I just want to throw that out there because he says there are groups in the UK that are just like this.
All right. Very interesting. Guys, watch the movie yourselves. I didn't do it justice. My eloquence is lacking today compared to Derek Gilbert, Chad Riley, Tom Horn, Darren Gossinger, and Ray Boucher, all of whom are interviewed and do such an excellent job conveying this information, much more information than I can convey in this interview with Justen, but a great film, Higher Entities, The Lost Tapes. Our guest has been Justen Faull. Thanks, Justen.
Thanks, Sean.
All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. You know how much we appreciate it. A special thanks to my patrons who actually do make this type of content possible, especially when YouTube demonetizes truth. Oh, one last word. If you guys want to take a bite out of Google, which spies on you, stop using Google Chrome. Use the Brave browser. It's more than twice as fast, and it will never, ever spy on you. And guess what? It's got a built-in ad blocker. That's the Brave browser. It's free to download. I'll leave the link below. Download it, install it on your computer, and give it a try. I know you'll love it. It's fantastic. And for real news 24/7, you can visit us directly at sgtreport.com, the antidote to corporate propaganda. God bless, friends. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
They classified this document immediately and forwarded it to some very prominent people. And they said that this document outlined that the entities that people were calling space aliens were not actually from outer space, but that they were traveling through dimensions.